Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the BIMA support webinar this evening on Hear from Your Medical Defence Organisation. We're absolutely delighted to have you all with us this evening because we really have a very glittering and expert panel of from colleagues from medical defence organisations. We've got MDDUS here, we've got the MDU here, and we've got the MPS here. And between them, Naeem, Udvita and Kashif have over 50 years experience in medical legal defence of healthcare practitioners. So it's a really stunning lineup that we have and stunning set of presentations that we have for you this evening. Some of the terrain that we're going to cover this evening is how and when do medical defence organisations provide legal representation and medical legal advice. We're going to cover what is not covered by MDOs. We're going to look at how MDOs differ from traditional employment unions. And we're going to look at some illustrative case studies too of some examples of defence, successful defence. And obviously this is a very interactive session, one that we're hoping is very informal with dialogue between the panelists, the participants and ourselves. So therefore, we would like you to engage in questions and answers in a question session. What we'd like to do is suggest that you put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat function. The chat function is disabled, so please put your questions in the Q&A box. And the Q&A box is enabled throughout the next hour or so. So throughout the duration of this session, you can use the Q&A function, and the panelists will try and respond to as many of those queries and questions as is possible, either throughout the session or indeed at the end. So because we've got such a packed session tonight, let's crack on with the agenda. And what we decided that we'd like to do to kickstart the proceedings is to have a short poll with yourselves, the participants, with respect to your experience with medical defence organisations. So my trusted colleague Naomi is going to put on your screen the poll, the BIMA MDO webinar poll. There's simply 3 questions there. And if you're a healthcare worker, then please, if you could respond to those questions now, I'll give you 30 seconds or so to respond. Simply 3 questions. If you simply click on the answers and press submit, then we'll capture the full range of responses from you all. And that will just give us a bit of a litmus test as to people's experiences of MDOs. Okay, is that enough time? Has everybody completed their votes? Countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The poll is closed now. Naomi, do you have the results there? Right. So this is fascinating. So in terms of have you ever been referred to a disciplinary hearing, 88% have said no, which is great news. You know, that's fantastic. In terms of are you currently registered with any medical defence organisation, nearly 90% are. So that's very interesting. So that's wonderful. I hope we can have a really interactive discussion then this evening. That's super, Naomi. We can close there. Okay, so without further ado, let me move on to our first speaker of this evening, who is Naeem. Naeem, please introduce yourself, and then let's commence with your presentation.
Thank you, Yasmin. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this session, which I'm really looking forward to. So my name is Naeem Nazem. I'm the head of the medical division at MDDUS. My background is in hospital medicine. I used to be a neurologist, and then I moved into law, and I've been working in the medical defence field for about 15 years now. So the brief that I had was to talk to you about what a medical defence organisation is, what we provide. I think I have about 10 minutes of your time. I'm very much looking forward to the question and answer session and hearing from you and trying to address your questions. So I will try and keep it brief and to my time. So perhaps I can start off with what is MDDUS. So we're a mutual defence organisation, which means that we're not for profit. We have about 65,000 members, about 80% of whom are doctors and allied healthcare professionals, and about 20% of whom are dentists. The types of services that we offer to all our members is 24 hours, 7 days a week, telephone advice. That's with any medico-legal query that you have. So you're put through directly to an advisor who can answer your question in about 99% of calls that we receive. And we also provide written and telephone advice with a whole range of things which might arise out of your practice of medicine. So that could be things like complaints, inquests, disciplinary and regulatory investigations, ethical dilemmas, and legal queries that you might receive for statements for the court or such like. We also provide indemnity for for claims which are not covered by state-backed indemnity. And we provide training in CPD. A lot of the training in CPD is free, available to everyone, even non-members. Some of it is gated and exclusive for members. We also have courses that we run, and again, those are discounted for members. And we provide employment advice to non-medical staff. So those are kind of the core services that we offer. But what I'd like to do is actually talk about some of the other things that we do to try and support our members, because we really feel that we're by the side of our members. So what we want to do is identify proactively what the needs of our members are and create an environment in which they can work better and more effectively. So what I'd like to do is pick up on something that we started at the end of last year, which I think actually resonates well with your own survey, which was I know published in the BMJ earlier this month, and I'd spoken to Salman about the results of it as well. So if we can move to the next slide. So this is a survey that we did last year, at the end of last year, but running into this year. So it's very much looking at racist microaggressions, which we know are faced by particularly international medical graduates, but also doctors of an ethnic minority background. And what we wanted to do, what our anecdotal experience was, is that doctors in these categories face a disproportionate level of scrutiny, are often dealt with unsympathetically and challenged inappropriately. So what we wanted to do is do some objective evidence or gather some objective evidence. So what we did is we undertook a survey with an independent organisation, and we surveyed 2,000 of our members, doctors and dentists, and 1,000 members of the public, because we wanted to benchmark what we found with doctors and dentists with what the perception was of the public. And what we wanted to do is really explore racist microaggressions, what people understood about them, how they're addressed in the NHS, and how they impact those who are subject to them. Naomi, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide. So these are the key takeaways, and perhaps I can take you through the left-hand side to begin with. So disappointingly, but perhaps not surprisingly, we found that a lot of international medical graduates, which were the focus of our survey, have been subject to racist microaggressions and persistent racist microaggressions. So nearly 6 out of every 10 international medical graduates who were surveyed said that they had encountered regular racist microaggressions. In terms of microaggressions, just in case anyone's not clear as to what I mean by that, so that could be anything which makes someone feel othered in some way based on their race. So examples that we were given by the members who responded to our survey were things like being referred to as that Indian lady, being told, but one doctor said that their consultant said to them, oh, I could never pronounce your name, so I'm not even going to try. Another doctor said that a relative of a patient said, oh, my mum's just not going to understand you, so there's no point trying to talk to her. And the mum actually interjected and said, actually, I can understand her absolutely fine. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about. So the low level, but what we know is that they have a significant impact on mental health and well-being. And that was really the focus of what we were trying to understand better from the survey. When we explored about those racist microaggressions, or do you report them? And disappointingly, we found that the majority of doctors who faced those racist microaggressions, 72%, didn't report them. And you'll be aware of the new Good Medical Practice published this year, which says that everyone has a duty, all doctors have a duty to raise concerns. So we want to look into why do they not raise these concerns? And again, we found the majority of them, 2/3, found that they didn't raise the concerns because they had no confidence in the system, that they would be supported, that they would be heard, that their concerns would be addressed. And that's very much why we've called our campaign We Hear You, because we want to escalate the voices of IMGs, of those subject to racist microaggressions, make sure that they are heard, make sure that their voices are recognised, and create an environment really in which they are supported better, and a culture within the NHS in which they are heard and they are valued and recognised. We also looked at members of the public, as I mentioned, so 1,000 members of the public. We found that the majority of them, 80% of them, thought this was not an issue at all in the NHS, and the majority of them thought that it wasn't. If it was an issue, it wasn't a significant issue. So again, we see a big disconnect between 60% IMGs facing these and very little of the public feeling that this is an issue. In terms of doctors in general, if you witness it, do you report it? Again, we found that the majority of doctors who witness them don't report them. And again, it's because they feel that nothing's going to happen if they do report them. So it really shows there's a need to address both with IMGs, but also with all NHS workers to make sure that they call out these racist microaggressions when they happen. As I mentioned previously, what we know is that these have a significant impact on emotional well-being and mental and cause moral distress. And I know your own survey, which was published this month, shows that the survey that you did shows the impact of not having your voice heard and the distress that causes members, your members, and that was very much reflected in our survey as well. So that's why we think it's really important to address this, because especially IMGs, international medical graduates, they're already in a difficult situation and they're facing these racist microaggressions, which is eroding their well-being further. If we could move to the next slide. So what are we doing about it as MDDUS, which is perhaps the next logical question? So firstly, we're engaging with stakeholders. So we're engaging with organisations like BEMA, but also with the Royal Colleges, with the GMC, to try and drive forward a culture of change and look at what can be done organisationally within hospitals, within practices, within leadership in the NHS to create a better environment. We're also thinking about the well-being of our members, and that's why we've developed Your Halo, and it's been around we developed it pre-COVID, and that's an emotional well-being support service that we offer free of charge, and it's entirely confidential. We never know if members access it. But of those, I saw 90% of you are members of a defence organisation. If any of you are members of MDDUS, I really want to highlight this to you, because we get that you face challenges, that your emotional well-being is being impacted by those challenges. And we have this service available to you. As I said, it's free of charge. It's delivered by an external organisation with licensed healthcare practitioners, and it's unlimited in the number of sessions that are available. So you would have heard of other sessions being capped. This is unlimited emotional well-being support. So I really would encourage anyone who is in a difficult situation and is an MDS member to really access that service. That was everything that I had, and hopefully I was to time. So thank you very much for listening.
That's excellent, Naeem. That got us off to a very good start. Can I just ask a quick question, just before I pull in questions from the Q&A? But when you talked about the public and the public's response and comparing it to your members' response, was it did you look at the ethnicity of the public, or did you because my experience is that when white people say, it's white people who often can't see a problem, but actually
Yes.
when the ethnic people can see a problem, even if they're members of the public. So I just wondered if there was a gender dimension, an ethnic dimension to your public definition.
Thank you, Yasmin. It's a great question. And we've picked it up in what we're doing is a follow-up survey. And as part of the follow-up survey, we're drilling down further into the demographics. So the survey that we launched was with an external agency. And what they did was they assured us that there were benchmarks. So it was a demographic across in proportionate to the population. So the number of ethnic minorities versus white versus Afro-Caribbean, it was proportionate, the 1,000 members, but we didn't have the specific data as to who responded to what, because it was anonymous in terms of their responses.
Okay. Sorry, just one very quick question before we move on. You know, when you talked about the new medical practice that came out this year, and you talked about the obligations, what are the, can you just repeat?
Of course, absolutely. So the GMC, absolutely. So the GMC in the new Good Medical Practice published this year says that every doctor has a duty to report concerns when they believe that there might be, for example, racist abuse going on in the workplace, that every doctor, IMG and non-IMG, has a duty to make sure that it's called out. And as I said, that's why we're calling our campaign We Hear You, because we think that there's a lot of work to be done. Most doctors won't report it, and we know from our survey. So if there's this obligation, there's a long way to go, and we want to try and support everyone who's involved in that, key stakeholders in doing that work.
Okay, lots to say, but I don't want to hold the floor. Naomi, I can't see any questions in the Q&A. So if that's the case at this stage, that's fine. If we move on to Udvita, our next speaker, And if I can just encourage colleagues, participants, to please feel free to put any questions or queries in the Q&A. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, hi, Yasmin. Thank you for the invitation to this. My name's Ethan Nandasoma. I have worked with the MDU since 2008. My background is in gastroenterology and hepatology, so also a hospital doctor like Naeem. And in fact, I worked as a specialty doctor in hepatology up in Leeds up until sort of January of last year. And I'm head of the medical advisory part of the Medical Defence Union. Frankly, my concern when asked to do this was that that we could end up covering a lot of the same ground in terms of what the role of a medical defence organisation is, and I hope we won't actually do that, because I think Naeem's talk was really interesting and really helpful in terms of the issues facing all doctors, IMGs and doctors from ethnic minorities. I'm not going to sit here and sell the MDU to you. I don't think that's a good use of your time. And I think the benefit today would really be in the Q&A, so do feel free to ask them. And I've taken the case example out because I know that we have some coming up later on. The MDU has over 200,000 members. Like the other organisations here, we are all mutual organisations run by and for doctors, and we are not for profit. To touch on one of the things that was done, one of the real challenges facing doctors is this concept of multiple jeopardy, that a single clinical incident, a single episode of patient care can run into lots of different things. Now, Naeem spoke about those, so I won't go through the things again, but it can be something relatively non-threatening such as a complaint, to something really threatening, like an investigation for gross negligence manslaughter. And I would say that I had a case where the doctor faced, actually it was an NHS case, so they weren't deeply involved in the civil claim, but they faced a criminal investigation, a local disciplinary investigation, the GMC, a complaint, and a coroner's inquest. And this case started when the doctor was an SHO and concluded 2 weeks before they started their consultant job. And so you can imagine the stress caused by that. The other thing I'd build on is the issue of racism and microaggressions, etc. The point I guess I'd make here is, and this is something where we have very strongly tried to engage the GMC in understanding this, is that even in the absence of racism on the part of the GMC or even an employer, the impact of things that happen during these investigations can be really asymmetrical. To give you an example, if you are a doctor in a substantive post facing a GMC investigation or a GP partner, you might well face all the incredible stress of an investigation, which is stressful and difficult, but you will probably remain in your post, be it perhaps working under restriction. You'll probably be paid, and you'll probably have supportive colleagues around you. If you are a new doctor in the UK trying to find your first post and you're working in a locum post, you may well find a similar issue during the investigation. For example, something the GMC may see as minor, such as some interim conditions requiring you to notify them about posts or work under a moderate degree of supervision. Those can essentially amount to a suspension and stop that doctor earning money or working. So I think that's the other really point about these. Many of these procedures, be it the police or the GMC, they're time consuming and don't work effectively. And a lot of our work is to try and campaign in that area for regulatory reform, because although the debate on racism at the GMC is clearly an ongoing one. But even in the absence of that, the way these processes work have a really asymmetric impact on different sorts of doctors. I know, Yasmin, you mentioned areas where we are likely to help or not be involved for our members. That's in our member guide. I'm sorry, the link to it is probably too small to get. I probably should have put a QR code on. In essence, our expertise is matters arising from the care of patients. We have a slightly broader remit when we come to the GMC because we have a lot of experience at GMC, but it tends to be those sorts of areas where we are members. We do have educational resources. We have webinars that you can register for as a non-member. Our sales team also offer seminars at your place of work, and we obviously go out and do talks. I think we have a partnership with Doctors in Distress. We have a lot of health and well-being content for our members and a peer support network to allow doctors going through processes such as inquests, claims, complaints, or the GMC, access to somebody who's been through that process and out of the other side to talk to. The observation I'd make on the health and well-being point was that when I started at the MDU, whenever we looked at whether this would be in demand, it really wasn't. They were, that what people wanted was to be able to talk to us quickly and to have accurate medico-legal advice. But I think that the pressures on the profession and the NHS at the moment has meant that this is a really difficult and unmet need at the moment, which is why I'm sure all my colleagues will work for organisations that have introduced this. And in many ways, for doctors who are unwell, the practitioner health programme, which fortunately is still available to secondary care after a brief withdrawal, is really excellent. But actually, the health and wellbeing support we intend to provide, or we try to provide, is really related to those where a doctor isn't quite in that circumstance, but is still really struggling. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully, again, keeping to time, because I think the discussion will certainly be beneficial there. I'll stop sharing. Yasmin, hopefully I've kept to time.
Thank you very much indeed. That's incredibly helpful, Vita. Thank you. Can I just ask, because I haven't seen any, I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A. But can I just ask, that when you talked about regulatory reform, I mean, obviously, systemic, structural, institutional change could really help the issues of equity and inclusion and diversity and health and well-being, and actually help to stem and address positively some of the problems that we're seeing colleagues undergo. So in terms of regulatory reform, what are you guys doing, and who with, and what success are you having, and what are the blocks and barriers to making step changes?
I mean, I think there's a few sort of and again, I will be quite frank and say I'm quite sure that MDDUS and MPS are involved in exactly the same processes. I mean, there's a lot of debate about regulatory reform at the moment, in part in the context of the Physician Associate and Anaesthetic Associate regulation coming in. Now, that is likely to be a blueprint for the regulation of doctors when that comes on. Now, there are some things in that are positive. There are some things such as, moving to sanction after giving notice of an intention to do something, which we think can be problematic for, doctors who are unwell, etc., who may not have responded to correspondence, etc. So there are those sorts of worrisome things in there. We've also had quite a sort of debate with the GMC in terms of, I mean, that you'll not be surprised to hear that they have often tied themselves up into knots on issues of probity and honesty, and they have taken such a black and white approach to that in terms of any probity issue clearly calls a doctor's fitness to practice into question. Now, again, we had a debate with them about that, saying actually they are often obsessed with what members of the public think, and we know the public largely say to them, look, actually, unless it's in a clinical setting, we don't really see this as being a big deal. But it's there now. They have published some guidance, some updated guidance on what they term low-level dishonesty, etc. To be honest, I don't know whether that will be a win, because they had a go at that a couple of years ago and still found themselves in the same quandary. So there are those types of things. We did also contribute to things like consultations in relation to gross negligence, manslaughter, etc., and all of those. I think though, there's the elephant in the room for most of these things is the length of time they take. So even if you set aside everything else, the sheer length of time a GMC investigation takes is a punishment in itself. And it's really kind of prosaic, practical things like that that make a difference. You know, the discussions we have with GMC are often about, you know, they will say, look, would it help if we signposted them to your wellbeing services or to do this or to do that? And frankly, it comes to a point where we say, look, wellbeing support and leaflets are all very well and they're important, but they can't be a substitute for trying to make this process more efficient. You know, so there's some of those high level things, but there's some real prosaic practical things relating to how long these processes go on, how well initial investigations are done at trust level, and we would engage with practitioner performance advice, etc., about that, and things like that, that I think are really, you know, areas where things could be improved.
And can those be practically speeded up? You know, is this really impossible to do, or are there practical, tangible ways of actually reducing the longevity of these?
I think at a trust level for clinical concerns, I think, you know, doing some things like training case investigators better. And also, and I guess this is another thing we've banged the drum for with variable reception, is looking at objective criteria. Okay, because what we said was that our members, you know, and those from ethnic minorities aren't being asked to be judged to a different standard. They are just being asked for a fair process. And the examples I'll give you is, for example, if there is a concern about a complication rate from a surgeon, or concern about or a miss rate from a radiologist, there is literature out there about what is a typical miss rate. You know, otherwise you end up in a process where somebody looks back at hundreds of cases and says, well, there's 2 or 3 here that have gone wrong. Well, that may be just going with the territory. And so I think there are things like that that can make the process, you know, both quicker, more robust, and more objective.
Okay. Okay, I've just seen one question that hasn't been answered yet in the Q&A, and that is, in cases where patients have been involved in an incident which police are investigating, any piece of advice when responding to a police correspondence via the proper channel, for example, in terms of asking for the description of the patient's condition?
Yeah, so in these sorts of things, these are the things I would say, look, ring our advice line about. We usually answer the phone in about, you know, 20 seconds. You can talk to us about that live, because it really depends on the circumstances. In general, there are some things that the police have the power to compel, such as naming the driver of a vehicle in a road traffic accident. Otherwise, you're often having to make a judgment about whether there's a public interest disclosure to be made. When they're asking about a condition of a patient, often it's somebody who's the victim of an assault. And unless there's information you can share that's going to protect other people, it may well be sensible to say, look, I'm really sorry, I'm not trying to be obstructive, but I can't give you that information at this stage, and it can be revisited when the patient has recovered. Now, there may be some circumstances where, say, for example, if there's been violence in the home or what have you, where there may be other people at risk, etc., where sharing information to allow those other people to be protected may be relevant. But what I'd say is, you know, these are usually things to sort of talk on a case-by-case basis, to not ramble on too much. The other thing I would say is the police powers, and Kasif will probably have a better understanding of this than me, they're quite limited until the patient is actually charged with an offence. You know, so there may be things that enable a disclosure but don't require it. So I can see there's a clarification here is a context of where written consent is provided by the patient to share information. There, I think you're okay to share it. Your challenge there is difficult in being objective about what you write and being clear about what was your clinical assessment, what the patient told you, things like that. And again, I'll be quite frank and say I'm sure that Naeem and Kazifa, MDDUS and MPS would do the same, is to say, look, these are statements where if you anonymize them and send them to us, we can look them over for you and give you some direct help with something like that.
That's really super. Well, thank you very much. That's incredibly helpful, Udvita, and I'm sure that the conversation's it's just starting, it's gonna hot up. So, okay, let's move to our third speaker, Kashif. So Kashif is from the Medical Protection Society. Great to have you with us, Kashif, too. And if you could introduce yourself and your organisation, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Kashif, you might want to start your video as well.
Right, okay. Can you see me now?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, apologies. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name's Kashif. Unfortunately, unlike my other colleagues on here, I wasn't able to make my parents proud and become a doctor. I wasn't smart enough, so I did the next best thing and became a lawyer. But please don't hold that against me. As Naeem and Udvita have already kind of explained the general gist of what a medical defence organisation provides, I'm not going to rehearse a lot of that, but I will go through some of these slides quite briefly, just make sure that I haven't missed anything. As my title suggests, I am a lawyer at MPS, and I generally deal with cases involving General Medical Council and regulatory body disciplinary cases. So anything that isn't a clinical negligence claim comes to me or one of my team. We're spread across London and Leeds. So between us, we manage quite a wide range of cases. If I can have the next slide, please, Naomi. So MPS, this is our stated purpose. Members are at the heart of what we do, and indeed one of our key values is members first. Our vision is stated there. We'll read it out for you, and that's how we try to live that purpose. If I can have the next slide, please. So perhaps what makes us distinct from the MDU and the MDDUS is our international presence. We have, as this slide shows, an international basis across a number of countries, Australia, Europe, obviously, Australia, Asia, New Zealand, and the Caribbean. We protect and support the professional interests of over 330,000 members around the world, working across 22 countries and in 18 different time zones. That in itself can create challenges. So we do a lot to try to ensure that members across the world receive the same or similar levels of service in the language that they speak. We have a diverse global membership, which includes, for example, Malaysia, which, as many of you know, has a majority Muslim population. Can I have the next slide, please? Another area that we pride ourselves in and perhaps differentiates us from the other MDOs is our funding research. We began in 2022 a fund to provide as part of the MPS Foundation, in which we invest in research aimed at improving patient safety and professional well-being. Since 2022, we have provided opportunities for our members to participate in research. We have funded research to ensure that induction for international medical graduates is the best it can be. We have invested over 1 million to support research and develop tools to improve the well-being of members. The reason why I mention this, I've been asked to mention it, is primarily in case there are people out there listening to this or watching this webinar who might be interested in research. And if you are and you would like some funding, please consider us and apply for support. You can find more information on that on our MPS Foundation website. Next slide, please, Naomi. So like the MDU, sorry, and the MDDUS, we also keenly advocate on behalf of our members in these areas. We see firsthand, for instance, the impact that GMC investigations, disciplinaries, and in the most extreme cases, criminal investigations have on our members. We also see firsthand how they could be handled better. So that these are within these areas, we are constantly advocating for improvements that will hopefully lead to more fairer processes and proportionate responses. In terms of well-being, we support members during their darkest times, and I'll talk more about that perhaps later. And we also have a good view of the support that they need for their mental well-being. Can I have the next slide, please? So on that side, we did carry out a survey of our members, 197 of whom provided who had directly experienced a GMC investigation. We were keen to obviously hear from them in terms of the impact that had on them. The statistics there kind of speak for themselves. Essentially, you can see the impact that having a GMC case has on our members. And we use this data to work with the GMC and provide them with this data. And to their credit as well, they have worked with us constructively in this space, responding to feedback and looking at areas in which they can improve and perhaps streamline their processes. Next slide, please. Like our cousins at the MDU and MDDUS, we also have various resources to support well-being. We have lobbied the government recently in relation to the potential curtailment of the NHS Practitioners Health Programme. Happily, that's been reversed now. We also offer a counselling advice line, which is available 24/7 as well for our members. Next slide, please. So that was quite a quick run through in terms of what we are as an MDO, the kind of cases that we support. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, if it involves the practice of medicine or dentistry for our dental members, we will help you. And in some instances, even if it doesn't involve, strictly speaking, the practice of medicine and dentistry, we may still help you. So that's the benefit of having discretionary indemnity, which is what we provide. Our aim is certainly to try to support our members where we can. And allied to that is the need to tailor that support. So this is perhaps where I'm now coming more into my area of expertise, is how do we help members who do find themselves in need of our support. Obviously, our hope is always that none of our members ever find themselves in the position where they need our help with a GMC complaint. The fact is, however, that doctors from ethnic minorities in particular are more likely to be referred to the GMC by their employers or healthcare providers. That's not my opinion. That is published by the GMC itself following a review that they undertook. So if and when you find yourself in that unfortunate situation, how would we at the MPS go about helping you? So as I've said on that slide, there are a variety of ways in which our support can be obtained through the 24/7 advice line or through written correspondence, emails, and what have you. One thing that is consistent is that we employ a multidisciplinary approach. So what that means essentially is that we try to tailor the support to your needs. There's no point providing you with a whole team or an army of people wanting to help you if all that you need is a bit of advice. That's not to say that you won't have access to that army if required, but we do try to tailor our approach. Again, putting members at the heart of what we do. Where things do get more complex, particularly with a GMC case, how we work with those cases is we will have the support of a doctor, a medical legal consultant, legal colleagues like myself, and other professional support colleagues, and we work together. As I've said there, the focus is very much one of collaboration. Our expertise is obviously key to that, but we ensure that we always adopt a very clear strategy in the cases. And for that to happen, we need to have a clear objective. What is it that our member needs and wants? And the strategy is how we go about and achieve that. The key for me and my colleagues is the collaboration. It is ultimately our members' case, and our job is to support them to get the best possible outcome. We do that in collaboration with our members. We do get, thankfully, very good outcomes for our members. And the next slide, if I can please ask you to move on, Naomi, is an indication of our members' view of the service that we provide. Just to put this into context, at the end of every case in which the legal team are involved, we send a survey to all of our members, regardless of the outcome. So these are by no means cherry-picked data. So this was the outcome for last year. We received 129 surveys back, and you can see that 97% of those who provided their responses rated our service as a 6 or 7 out of 7. Those scores are obviously very comforting for us, but we don't take them for granted. The next slide perhaps is more meaningful for us and for you, in that these are direct quotes from our members who received our service, and I'm sure when you read them, they'll probably resonate with you as well. Interestingly, the survey that was done at the outset of this session suggested that the vast majority of you have not found yourself in this situation, which is very encouraging. But I don't know whether it was a coincidence that the 13% who did was also the same number of those who are not currently with an MDO. That may be a coincidence, but it may not be. So this is again a whistle-stop tour of the service that we provide. I did promise to talk about a couple of cases, which I will do now. We have seen, and I think it'll be no surprise to those present on this webinar, the increase in sentiment and unfortunate racist sentiment, both from anti-Semitism as well as Islamophobia, heightened clearly by what's going on in Gaza right now, a subject which has obviously great import for those on this call, but healthcare professionals generally, I would say, given the struggles and the real sacrifice, literally some paying with their lives and what's going on overseas. So it's very hard to distance ourselves from that. So there has been, and we have got a couple of cases I can talk to, anonymized, of course, because these are current cases. We have seen an increase in the number of referrals being made to the General Medical Council, where people have identified things that they've taken issue with based upon what their doctors, or whether they're their doctors or someone else's doctors, what they've observed as being biased one way or another. And that's led to referrals being made to the General Medical Council, who will then find themselves in a position of having to investigate some of these matters. Some of them, I would say the majority of them, they do get triaged out by the GMC. So the doctors themselves may never come to learn of these complaints, but those that don't get triaged out and are escalated for the investigation, that's where we tend to get our requests for support from our members. So the two cases that I would like to highlight for the purpose of discussion, both involve medical members, one of whom is a Muslim doctor who made some comments on LinkedIn social media. The comments were quite varied, but the gist of the comments and the particular comment which gained most adverse reaction was a comment regarding Israel being a Nazi regime, or words to that effect, and suggesting that the UK and the United States were complicit in that colonial project. There were other comments made as well, but that was perhaps the worst of them. That individual doctor was referred to the GMC by a pro-Israeli group who monitored obviously what was being said by this and other individuals on LinkedIn. The GMC felt that was a serious matter, such that they invoked their interim orders processes. So whenever there's an investigation, GMC investigation, as Udvita mentioned, these are quite time-consuming investigations. They can last many months, if not years, and in the interim, that could lead the public or patients at risk of a potentially unfit doctor. So for those cases, they have a mechanism by which an interim order can be made to provide protection where it's necessary to do so. So in this instance, the GMC felt that this was such a serious case that it did need a view of the interim orders tribunal to determine whether an immediate order needed to be made, either one of conditions or a suspension, whilst the substantive investigation was taking place. So in this particular instance, we were successful in arguing that no order should be made, despite the fact that the GMC's position was that an order of conditions, if not suspension, was appropriate given the remarks that were expressed. I think the key to that case was that it wasn't clear from the post that the individual posting it was a doctor, and that may well have been the key to that particular outcome. Another case involving a Jewish medical practitioner. This time it concerned a GP study WhatsApp group comprised of some 10 to 12 GPs. Within this WhatsApp group, one of the GPs, a Muslim, put a message asking if her fellow GP colleagues on this WhatsApp group would like to participate in a pro-Palestine protest that she was arranging. The Jewish colleague took exception to that and made some unfortunate remarks, suggesting that the comment by her Muslim colleague was typical of Muslim gaslighting. It was also suggested that her Muslim colleague might be anti-Semitic. And again, these comments were hurtful, and the individual doctor who was at the receiving end of those comments complained to the GMC. There was, let's say, there was more context to this case as well as the other case, which I don't have time to go into. But on this occasion, again, the GMC took a view that this was serious. Although patients weren't involved, it involved colleagues, but this was serious. The comments that were made were biased, discriminatory, and racist. In the same way, it referred the matter to the Interim Orders Tribunal. On this occasion, however, the Interim Orders Tribunal decided that it would not be appropriate to make no order, and imposed conditions on this particular doctor's registration. So I merely highlight these cases. I say both cases are ongoing. The substantive investigation is ongoing. We don't know how these cases will end, but I just thought I would highlight these cases just for the purpose of discussion, but also to highlight and recognize the huge sentiment and emotion that is involved at this time, and no doubt the worry of the medical and healthcare professionals of how should they go about expressing these views, and also concern that if they do, would that mean that they get in trouble with their employers, or if not, the regulator? So I really just raise that. I leave that there for you to think about, and hopefully that will help to facilitate some conversation in what we have left of this session.
Thank you very much, Kashif. There's some really rich and valuable and illustrative examples and information that you've given there. Just want to provide as much opportunity for our participants to engage with yourselves as panelists. And there's a question here from Imran. Imran is saying, it's the first time I'm seeing all three medical defence units, defence unions. That's great. He's saying, have these organisations thought about coming together to take legal action to curtail GMC on its operations as an independent body protecting public and doctors from each other? Then it ought to have public funding as well, since GMC can only charge its which doctors it should be reduced. And then he makes an additional point about it's not a business, they shouldn't invest commercially. And apparently last year it made huge profits on its 20 million income. So anyway, so I think that the gist of the question is, have you three medical defence organisations thought about coming together in order to make some real regulatory kind of impact collaboratively?
I'm happy to kick off on that. It helped. First of all, I think with all three of us, you're pushing against an open door with the sentiment of that question. Okay, but I guess here is the kind of bad news part of it is GMC is a statutory regulator. They are set up to regulate doctors, and their funding structure, etc., is set out on that. So to kind of challenge them on the basis that their fee structure should be different, or what have you, in my view, would be unlikely to succeed. It would require a political decision to say this must be structured differently, where we all usually, not typically together, because they're usually, doctors are a member of one organisation, and so it'd be one of us sort of involved typically, is that we will challenge GMC on points of law where we think they have got a decision wrong. Now, that's not as straightforward as it sounds, in that the higher courts, and Kashif will be able to give you chapter and verse on this, are very respectful of the GMC as a regulator, insofar as they say they're the professional regulator, they have the expertise, they have heard the evidence in the first instance. So whether we agree with that or not, and often we don't, that's how it is. So we will challenge on points of law. The downside of that is that when you do it on the wrong case, you create precedent for future cases that actually makes life harder for doctors, not easier. So I do get kind of what you're saying, but it's very difficult in the context of a statutory regulator. So sorry, I'll shut up now and let these guys come in.
I would say that I completely agree with Advitha in terms of that, in terms of there's a limit to what we're able to do. I completely understand, and as Advitha says, you're preaching to the converted, because we're all on the same page there and share your frustration, but there's a limit to what the legislation is, what it is. So there's a limit to what influence we can do there. What is within our remit, we certainly, and I know that I speak for all defence organisations, we will certainly advocate hard for our members in defending them. So if we believe that the GMC, the MPTS panel has made an incorrect decision, if we believe that they made a disproportionate decision, if we believe that they've taken external things that they shouldn't have taken into account in making a decision, those are all things we all seek independent legal advice, and we'll follow that legal advice. And what I would reassure you of, again, I don't want to speak for the other MDOs, but I'm pretty sure they're on the same page on here, is that that's not a commercial decision. We're all mutual defence organisation. We're here to support our members. We don't say, well, that's going to cost us too much, so we're not going to do that. If it's the right thing to do for the member, that's what we will do.
Yeah, and if I can just come in on that, just support what's been said on that in that front. But I think obviously the areas in which we do advocate and try to lean in on behalf of our members and by extension the medical profession is by engaging with the GMC and challenging them on some of these decisions as well. We have various means for doing so. I might lose the audience now if I disclose this fact, but I used to work at the General Medical Council. I used to prosecute within their fitness to practice directorate. So using the kind of the knowledge I built from that, and the contacts I made through that, we do have some constructive relationships with colleagues at the GMC at the senior level, but also those actively involved in decision making, and the challenge that Advita mentioned earlier about how long some of these cases take. That's where we do our most strongest advocacy in terms of trying to make sure that decisions are proportionate and they arrived at quickly. So we do operate at these various levels in terms of influencing the decision, and we're involved quite heavily with consultations, like our colleagues with the other MDOs as well. So we have these different relationships. So it's not simply a case of because they're a statutory body, there's nothing we can do. Absolutely, there's lots we can do, and there's lots that we do, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, Chief. That's really fascinating that you've had practical insights with the GMC as an insider, as it were. I mean, to what extent are the decision makers, particularly in terms of disciplinary and investigations and decision making, to what extent are they aware of racism and Islamophobia and discrimination and how it manifests itself, whether in the NHS or in academia or indeed in the workplace? You know, to what extent are they really competent to have a holistic, comprehensive understanding of what's happening to the the minority ethnic member who's because we hear constantly about the weaponization of the GMC, especially in the current political climate. So, you know, are they really fit for purpose themselves? I'm being inflammatory here.
Yeah, it's a complex question. And to give a one-word answer would not do it justice. The fact of the matter is, as I alluded to earlier, that if you are a member of an ethnic minority, you do have a statistically higher chance of being referred to the GMC. Now, there could be many reasons for that. Once it's at the GMC, their systems are working as it's been found as part of a review, often creates an environment where it becomes a conveyor belt, and it's almost done in a vacuum of other aspects. So that's where the question that you raised, Yasmin, about are they aware or are they cognizant of what's going on in the real world? Unfortunately, not always, because some of their processes are so driven by tunnel vision. Now, this is something that obviously the GMC have recognised as part of their review, and they're undergoing a process to make sure that they do have checks and balances throughout each stage of that process to help them highlight these things. They talk about, for instance, in their various guidance, their investigative guidance, their sanctions guidance, about the importance of recognising cultural differences and the impact that they may have on how a doctor from one background might represent compared to another background. But these things are obviously nice to have written down, but how do you actually recognise that in practice? That's the challenge. So I think this is a process which we are working with the GMC. They recognise it's a process as well, but we do hold them to account regularly.
That's very reassuring. And you know, I mean, obviously there's a horrendous situation at the moment with the current war in Palestine, and therefore I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity here to actually do something to really make some powerful reforms, some meaningful reforms, given the current climate we're in. I want to return back to the questions from participants, and one of them here is saying, Assalamu alaikum, from Irina. I'm a GP trainee and have MPS cover. Do you recommend finding enhanced cover as well? I'm not sure if there is one. I've only heard about it before. I don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that.
So was that a question about MPS cover? Right, okay, well, I was dreading this because that's not my area of expertise. I'm not aware of what enhanced cover is per se, so I think that might be, I would refer the sister to perhaps contact me separately on that, and I can answer her query. It will involve me redirecting her query, I should add, but I'm not sure what enhanced cover is. I think generally speaking, we provide a service in terms of what we call occurrence-based indemnity, and there is distinct from a claims-based indemnity. The occurrence-based is probably the gold standard, we would say. So maybe that's what the question is alluding to, but without more information, I'm not able to answer.
Okay, and another one is there any legal consequences for merely expressing a political view in a respectable way? I don't know if that covers if any of you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I think that the cases that I've highlighted show that there is nuance in that. The GMC's own guidance on the use of social media does provide some general tips. They're obviously very careful not to make any black and white statements on what is clearly an area of considerable grey. But one of the lines from their guidance is as follows: you must not use social media to abuse, discriminate against, bully, harass, or deliberately target any individual or group. So I think if that is borne in mind, and that's probably going to be fine for most instances.
Okay. Another question, this one for you, Kashif. Are you finding that there's an increase in referrals for your members based on social media comments? I'm seeing hearing of this with other regulators. Sadia.
Yeah. So I'm doing all the talking here, which comes naturally for me because I'm a lawyer. But as I alluded to earlier, the GMC have made us aware of an increased number of referrals being made. I don't have the numbers, specifically the numbers, but at one of our liaison meetings that we have with them, they did mention that they have seen an increased number of referrals. Now, happily, the majority of those are closed down without even the doctor being made aware of them. So that shows that the initial triage that the GMC doing is effective to a degree. What we see obviously are those cases which they feel are sufficiently serious for them to initiate an investigation.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm going to rattle through these quickly. And to what extent do MDOs help members with legal matters related to the GMC? Do they support in filing cases in higher court in case GMC outcome is against the member?
I think Naeem actually explained that very well when we were talking before, in the sense that we will typically take legal advice on the merits of that and follow it. It's not a cost-related decision, but as I say, you know, that an appeal is not like the first hearing. You know, that I guess this is really something to say that take advice early in these cases because it's far easier to prevent something than to undo it.
And last question from Rimsha here. I've met colleagues who refuse to report racism because they believe their training will be compromised. So what protection is there for doctors who do raise concerns to protect them from retaliation?
I'm happy to talk about this in general terms. I guess you've got two separate issues. You've got the theoretical protection, and there is theoretical legal protections in terms of doctors who raise concerns, albeit about patient safety, racism, discrimination, etc. in the workplace. But you've got to contrast that amongst the fact that we've still not got that right, certainly in the NHS, that any whistleblower, regardless of whether it's racism or not, still faces an incredibly difficult time. So I guess whenever I hate getting these calls, because I will say to members, you know, you really should do something about this. You have professional obligations to do something about it. And even if you have a mercenary reason, which is that you know, we see doctors 30 years down the line facing public inquiries in relation to medical issues where the question is, what did you do at the time to raise this concern? So it's really important advice, and it's important it's followed. But what I can't follow through with is saying, look, you will have necessarily a positive experience, or your concerns will be well received. You know, that is, you know, and even if a doctor is legally successful, you know, say taking the employer to an employment tribunal about whistleblowing and raising concerns, that doesn't necessarily get them or their career back on track. So I appreciate that. That sounds a bit doom and gloomy, and if, you know, Naeem or Kashif has a more positive view of it, then it would cheer me up. But unfortunately, that I think is a reality.
I agree with you, Aditya, completely. I think what I would say in trying to find the silver lining in it is what I would say is that your medical defense organization, any of the three of the organizations here, are fully aware of that, as Aditya has highlighted, and we're trying to take action to remedy that. So we do engage with senior stakeholders, with the GMC, with their clinical advisors, with the Royal Colleges. I know all three defense organizations here are doing that to actively create a different environment to try and deliver change, because we get that the situation is unacceptable and needs fixing, and we're trying our best to do that and advocate on behalf of our members.
You know, I think the BMA's rate equality chart that actually allows for anonymous reporting. I mean, do you think that anonymous reporting actually helps to protect the individual?
I mean, it might be. I mean, I'd rather it didn't need to be anonymous reporting, but I think reporting it is in and of itself, as long as it's not being. I mentioned our survey when I was presenting, and the vast majority of cases aren't reported, and that can't be right. So just getting it out there, getting that information out there, I think is important. It's sad if that can only be anonymous, but if it's still the only way that someone feels comfortable to, I'd rather they did report it.
And one question I'd like to put to all three of you, you know, I mean, obviously you've dealt with very complex cases, each of you, in your illustrious careers. But looking at those complex cases that you've dealt with, what do you think are the key features that enabled those cases to be successfully defended? I mean, Usida, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, you know, getting advice early on. And it's easier to deal with rather than undo. I mean, what tips and advice, or what kind of points can you extrapolate from those successfully defended cases that maybe our participants could benefit from?
Yeah, I think it's really that point, and be really careful about what you write in the first instance, you know, because often a doctor, you know, is involved in an adverse incident. They're on a week of nights. They're asked for a statement to be produced by 5 minutes from yesterday. You know, when they're tired without access to the notes, and it's really difficult. And I'm sure Naeem's had this experience of just sort of asking the doctor to slow down, because they're naturally in a state of panic. They just want this done. They're getting pressure from their consultant to submit it. But the real thing is that, and they will also think in their minds, if I say this, will that happen? If I say that, will happen. Now, that's a completely natural human reaction. But what I would say is you have to put that to one side. The only thing in your mind should be, what I write today, if this escalates to beyond where, you know, I think it will, or anyone thinks it will, can I stand by the wording of what I've said? Is it accurate? Am I willing to stand by it indefinitely? And that's the only question you can ask, because I know we'll all have a view of cases and say, yes, we can see this is going to end up at the GMC or what have you. But I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I'm still not operating at 100% in terms of picking those cases. So, you know, regardless, you've got to get that right and have something you can stand behind. So I guess that will be my top tip.
And Naeem?
So is that to me, Yasmin?
And Naeem, yes, any
I would completely agree with Aditya, and I would also say call your medical defense organization. Like we're here to help you. That's our purpose. That's our aim. So have a low threshold for calling us, seeking our advice, so we can support you. We can push back. I mean, I'm sure it's the same for Aditya and Kashif as well. The number of times that Trista said we need this by the end of today, and the members very anxious and stressed, and how do I do it? What do I send in? And we'll interject, and we'll talk to the trust, and suddenly that urgent deadline has been pushed back by 2 weeks, and we have a breather. Please don't feel pressured in that way, but certainly by your employer, contact your medical defense organization. I believe it's the same with the MPS and the MDU in terms of it doesn't affect your subscription with MDDUS. So you can call, I'm seeing nodding heads. So call as much as you want. Don't worry that, oh gosh, I've called twice this year, so my premium's going to go up for next year. It won't. That's very much what we're here for. We'd rather help you at that stage before it becomes an issue.
Is anything to add?
echo what obviously the points that were made by my colleagues. I think the thing that there sometimes can be a fear or a feeling, and I think there's perhaps this is some of the cultural side of things come as well. My experience is that generally speaking, it's the small things that create the biggest problems. So often healthcare professionals make a distinction in their mind between the healthcare or the clinical care that they provide, and as long as that's okay, everything else is fine. And often that it's the other stuff that yeah, and because it's the other stuff, sometimes there is this instinct of aggressively defending their position, because they're coming to it from the perspective of, well, look, I'm a good doctor, I'm a good dentist, I'm a good nurse, what have you, and that's understandable. But often it's the communication somewhere along the line. Communication has broken down, and that we tend to see is one of the key. As you asked, what's the key theme that runs through some of these cases? And for me, it's communication. Somewhere along the line, communication has broken down, and that problem is only exacerbated if advice is not sought earlier on, because it's the analogy that my mum and dad used to use about the toothpaste. You know, once it's squeezed out, you can't get it back in. And so echoing what Naeem and Udvisha have said, getting that advice early, if in doubt, please ask, because we can manage that message. We can help you articulate the defense that you have got, a legitimate one more often than not, in a way that's not going to make you look worse at the base level. But more often than not, we can unpick some of the communication issues and resolve it without matters escalating more than they need to.
Yes. I'm conscious that we're on now 13 minutes past 8, and there's still a number of questions kind of emerging. We've had like a surge of questions at the end. Let me just take one in the last couple of minutes. So it says, can people from advocacy and law backgrounds from any country be part of MDO, or can they help in forming certain, or can they contribute in fighting against racism and nepotism issues to Muslims around the globe? So I'm not sure if anybody, if that's relevant to anybody's.
So I'm not sure I understood the question.
I think the question is asking that they'd like to contribute. People from advocacy and law backgrounds from different countries would like to be part of the MDO and try and help in contributing to addressing issues. I don't know. Forgive me if I've misunderstood that.
I think we all have social media presence and websites, so by all means get in touch. And you know, the more voices advocating for our members, the better.
Wonderful. Okay. Look, there are a few more questions, but I literally, you know, I think we have run out of time. Are there any final comments that Udvita, Naeem, Kashif, you'd like to share with our participants before we close? Any final remarks?
Should we go in reverse order, guys? Just to, yeah. So I think I'd say that there is sometimes a fallacy in obviously those engaged, certainly general practitioners and those in the secondary health care, that because they don't need indemnity because it's provided by the Crown, the state, they often conflate that with getting help if they need it from when they themselves are in trouble with their local disciplinary matters or with a GMC or even in the criminal courts. And I think just to make that distinction clear, that does not cover, you are not protected by that state indemnity. All that deals with is clinical claims for negligence, clinical negligence. So I think that just to make that point clear, that there's a lot more that the MDOs provide than is available otherwise from the state indemnity.
Really, really valuable. Thank you so much. Any other comments, Naeem?
I'm unmuted, so I may as well go next, even though we're following the reverse order, won't we, Kashif? So I'll break that rule. Completely agree with what Kashif said, and I know that 10% of the survey showed 10% weren't with an MDO. I'm hoping that you know, if you've taken anything away from this session, from the three of us joining you, hopefully we've been able to reflect some of the merits of being a member of an MDO. I think obviously we'd all like you to be a member of our MDO, but I think we'd all universally agree that we'd want you to be a member of an MDO, most importantly to protect you. So I'd really encourage those 10% to do that.
final word to you as well.
Yeah, I guess if I can say one thing, it's just let you know, we know how hard it is out there at the moment for everybody, even without any additional challenges of being an IMG or from an ethnic minority. When things go wrong, it feels really professionally threatening. It is upsetting. It can make you angry. All I'd say is, look, take a deep breath and get some help from us and from your colleagues. And remember that you know, as things go on, what you want is somebody, and I'm saying, you know, your MDOs, we will do this, but from colleagues as well, you want somebody who is a critical friend, who is unequivocally supportive, but is going to tell you how it is. And don't go down rabbit holes of just people telling you what you want to hear, because that can also cause issues as well.
Really priceless advice from all of you, so thank you so much. I'm going to close now, so I think we've overrun, but Udita, Naeem, Kashif, Naomi, to all of our participants, a great big thank you for your contribution, your participation this evening. Thank you very, very much. I apologise for not being able to get to all of the questions and comments. I think Mona had some comments that I wasn't able to get to, but my apologies for that. I hope this webinar was useful. We will send the contact details of all three organisations to participants. And if you're not already a BEMA member, I'd urge you to join BEMA. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good night. Bye-bye.